to the Solitary Practice Podcast. I'm going to start off today with a quick recap from my trip. It went well. I had initially thought that the compulsion would not kick in for the first 12 hours or so, which is normal. Unfortunately, I didn't make the 12 that I'd hoped for. It kicked in around 6 hours in. There were some unusual symptoms this round. I haven't really encountered them before, but that kind of makes sense to me. The circumstances were unique. I left at a different time of year. The setup was not arranged as it normally would be, so it seems logical that I'd encounter some different symptoms. Overall, probably the strangest thing while I was away was just not practicing. I don't really notice how much it bleeds into everything that I do until I cut it off. I can still function, but it takes some accommodation to manage it, and it just kind of leaves me feeling off balance. I don't care for it. There was a great deal of relief here once I got back. Since most people just assume that I'm working during the week, I was able to leave and come back without it really being noticed. One of the things I've been kind of watching lately is kind of how I get what I want. And I'm not actively pursuing it. I just kind of idly think I want something and it just shows itself up. So I've been a bit spoiled, magically speaking, and it was very quiet while I was gone. The schedule got changed at the meeting, so I didn't have to present. I just had to basically say a few words, and I just sat at the end of the row, and that was all I had to do while I was out. All of my transportation changes went smoothly. That's not the case for the other attendees. They all had some form of hiccup in their travel, and I didn't have anything. So all in all, while I wasn't actually actively working, everything still ran very smoothly. And prior to leaving, a lot of those things, will it stay quiet here, or do I need to be concerned about people needing things while I'm gone? I didn't really want to present anything. I didn't really feel like talking to people. There's always the potential when you're traveling in the, we're going to say winter, for lack of a better term, through some of the United States, that you're going to encounter travel issues. And as far as I know, out of the 40 or so of us that traveled, I was the only one that did not have travel hiccups. Yeah, I'm a little spoiled, so I get kind of what I want without actually having to actively do anything about it. But now that we've got the travel recap out of the way, I want to touch base on an interesting request I've had. There have been a number of them, and some of them I'm going to work into upcoming episodes, but there was a tell us how you were taught in detail request. So today I'm going to kind of tackle that a little bit, I think. I've been looking at that one for the last couple days, kind of thinking, how would I even do that? And if nothing else, this has been great food for thought. I can tell you how I learned to do things. I'm just not sure why it would be useful to anyone. Unless someone's circumstances line up exceedingly closely to mine, it is unlikely that how I do anything would be of any use to anyone. Now, if somebody out there is by chance a practitioner that tied themselves to a particular piece of land very young and had a variety of entities teaching them through all the different areas of expertise from a very young age, and, grew up without a lot of the, and when I say grew up, I mean grew up magically, without a lot of, I'm going to say, religious influence of any form. I'd love to know about that. I've always kind of wondered if there's another one out there in the world somewhere. It kind of seems unlikely, but, if there is one, I'd be fascinated to find out. But I suppose if I'm documenting my practice, then there is some basis for recording how I learned and how I work. Maybe something even can be gleaned from comparing them, which means I'm going to try to organize my thoughts today, and we'll see how it goes. I had to kind of pick a time. No time period's the same. And again, this was a long building process based on little things over time. Again, this is why I don't think it's going to be useful to anybody, because unless you're starting out and you've got quite a lifespan left in front of you, I don't know how useful this is going to be, but we're just going to say, for the sake of argument, let's say I was around 10 or 11. And so how a day runs varies day to day, week to week, season to season, depending on where you are. But for right now, for the purposes of this podcast, we're going to say I'm 10 or 11. And it is the time period between June 20th and July 4th. And there's a reason for that. it has to do with the progressive seasons here on the farm and what takes place. But the gap around June 20th and July 4th would be, I guess we're going to call that a free period. It's usually one season has winded down and the other season does not kick in officially until the 4th of July. So this was when I was young, this would be a gap. There's not a lot of harvesting going on. Usually there are strawberries, but they're the tiny wild strawberries. Please don't anybody think about anything that resembles even remotely the strawberries you would buy in the store. These are very tiny, um, you know, like smaller than a dime strawberries. They're wild strawberries. They would be in season. The hay would be high in the fields. It's warm out. It's sunny, generally speaking, if we're having a good year weather-wise. So during this time period, none of the seasons are necessarily active. Like I said, we've wound down one. We're waiting to go into the next. And so during this time, school would be out, and I would be getting up around 6 a.m., thereabouts. I had a room on the second story, and it faced the barns and the fields. Directionally, we're going to say west, a little southwest, is the windward side of the house, and it allowed me to look out at the horses in the barns anytime. So I could keep an eye on what was going on at the barns and the fields, if there were any issues, if a car moved onto the property, you'd know that long before you got there because you'd hear it way before it ever broke the barway. But if the car came up past the house, then you would be able to see that from my room. Generally, when I got up, the rest of the family was not up. My father might have been up, or he may have gone to work at that point, but for the most part, it would be just me on my own. And since we're taught to be silent in the woods when we're kids, that was just something that stuck with me, but also, magically speaking, that kind of got drilled in as well. So it was kind of like a two-pronged approach. We're quiet in the woods, we're quiet around the animals, we're quiet as we work in the fields, and we're quiet magically when we work. We don't make noise, we don't make ripples, we don't do anything that will let anybody know that we're there. So silence just kind of got ingrained. So by the time I was 10, 11 years old, that was just very, very normal. But anyway, so I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's back up. When I start to wake up in the morning, the first thing to trickle across my consciousness was an awareness of the land. I always have it, but I was usually just getting back to my body, so I was surfacing from my travels and reintegrating into the physical, which meant I was starting to sense here more than where I had been. And once I'd settled back in and started to kind of like swim up into this consciousness, I'd encounter that tie to the land. It basically seemed that the tie was, deeply enmeshed in myself, so it seemed right as I'm reintegrating the deepest, strongest stuff would be the first stuff that I would come across or be aware of. And so that tie was a huge priority, still is, and it would be one of the first things that I, reintegrated into and came across. So it's going to tickle across my awareness, and it's just going to start, basically, it's not that it really tells you anything. When you do something over and over again every day, repeatedly for a long time, you kind of get a sense of it, so you can tell when something's wrong, something's right, whatever. I become aware of that tie first as I'm kind of just swimming back into consciousness. It was usually just about the time I could start to sense my actual physical body again, is when that kind of kicked off. And then with that tie came, a general awareness of how everything was farm-wise. Basically, I have a tag or a tether that the land can trigger when I'm away that will essentially jerk me out of wherever I am and return me to the physical plane, but really only happens in emergencies. And so when that tag isn't pulled or that, nobody's pulling me back, it's just kind of a fade in. I don't really know how else to describe it. You're just basically fading in, and all of that information from around here is just kind of there. So as my consciousness is coming around, I'm also being updated with what's going on the farm. From there, I'm waking up, I'm looking out the window, kind of checking on things visually, And then while the information's still coming in, I'm sliding out of bed, grabbing my clothes, get dressed. And while I'm doing all of that, I'm basically having kind of a little conversation with the land and the local entities, like what's the status, what needs attention, any, we're going to call them assignments for the day, or anything that needs done, what's on the schedule. And so by the time I'm slipping down the creaky stairs without making any noise, which is one of our little games that we used to like to play, again, to get silence ingrained, you have to practice it all the time, so I was always trying to be silent when I could. Once I was down the stairs, I was usually keeping an eye out for any of the resident ghosts, because we've got a bunch of them that kind of float in and out. They just startle you if you're kind of lost in thought and you go by one or whatever. Sometimes they can startle you, so I just always kept an eye out for them. From there, I would just kind of grab my shoes and was out the door. Usually, maybe it's 5 after 6 at this point. Like, this is not a long process, and we're not dawdling. From there, it's straight shot to the barns. As I went, usually I am greeting the sun. You soak up the sun's rays. It's you're basically saying hi. The birds are talking about all sorts of things, and one of my little habits is I like to run. So I will run pretty much everywhere. It was perfectly normal for me to sprint off the front steps down the barn road. So, very quick trip. And I was at the gate, greeting the gate snake, and climbing over the wall into the barnyard. If waking up is like a trickle of awareness, by now it's a roar. It's not unlike like whitewater rapids or a waterfall in the late spring after a thaw. Nothing spoken. It doesn't. None of these energies or entities speak in words. It's just kind of a flood of impressions and images and like a connection that deepens, and it basically entwines right around everything you are. So after a while, the boundaries get kind of faded and there's no real separation. So you've got a constant ebb and flow of stuff back and forth. And it takes some getting used to. If you get too swept away in it, you kind of lose your balance or you trip on things because your attention's wandered and you're trying to walk and you're not watching where you're walking. So morning chores are usually quick enough. The animals can sense what's going on. Sometimes they chime in. Sometimes they just go about their morning. Once all of that is done, I was either off into the fields or the woods for whatever I was studying at that point. So some days it might be a type of tree or an animal. Other times it was where do certain plants grow and why. Sometimes it's be a chicken or be a stalk of Timothy hay. And the lesson wouldn't necessarily be complete until I successfully learned to actually shift and become whatever was assigned. Not like to pretend to be it, but actually kind of assimilate into it. And once I could successfully basically make the shift to whatever was assigned, then it wasn't like it was over. So it wasn't like at one point I learned, we're going to stick with the chicken, basically the perspective and everything that goes on in a chicken. It wasn't like I did it once and then I moved on to, I don't know, mink or something like that. Then you had to do it and sustain it. And to stay as whatever it was, then complete some kind of task in this form. There was usually a task, and none of these things were flashy. So, there would be those kind of things. And it was all presented more as like a challenge or a game. If anybody's fairly competitive, they would have loved this. So sometime around midday, I kind of meander back to the houses. The adults freak out a lot less if they see you alive periodically. I learned that pretty quick. From there, a lot of times I would lounge under the circle of trees. We had a couple swings and like some toys and stuff down there, but basically I just spend time down there. A lot of it laying on the ground, just contemplating like the leaves or the sky or study the birds or the grass. Generally just kind of soaking it in. And some of the entities around might come by. They might greet me. They might say we'd speak for a bit. And we do it in that little nonverbal way with the little snippets of impressions or emotions, or maybe, we kind of show things to each other energetically. I think that's one of the key drivers in my preference for energetic communication. I spent a lot of time doing it, and it's very comfortable for me. Also, did it with a lot of different kinds, so I know a lot of different dialects, maybe. I'm not so thrilled with the speaking as I am with the energetic communication. So after that, I'd get lunch at one of the houses. Most likely, I would go to my grandmother's. She lived next door. While I was there, she'd kind of school me in cooking or preserving or history or genealogy, what have you. And then we'd spend some time picking berries or traveling the fields. When she'd head back to the house, I usually kind of, depending on where we were, hop the wall and end up in whichever field my horse was in at the time. Generally, I could get her to come over to a rock and climb on her. If anybody is picturing that these animals had in any way, any form of like halter or collars or anything on them, we don't turn anything out with those things on. There's a high likelihood an animal can hang themselves up on like a stray limb and get hung up. So everything is completely loose and free. There are no ropes or halters or anything like that. So you would have to convince this very large animal to come over and stand by a rock and let me climb on it. If you don't have a really great relationship with your livestock, that isn't going to happen. And there are lots of horse owners out there right now who could attest the fact that that would be a difficult thing to do with some other horses, but mine was fine with it. So I'd hop up on her back, and then usually I'd lay back, so my head on her hips, and basically I just kind of listen to the world around me. There's a lot going on. There's tons of gossip if you know how to listen. It was just fun to, again, be quiet and listen. As I'm doing that, I'd kind of, just keep an eye on the sky. The chewing would be very rhythmic, and she would, take her steps in a certain way as she grazed, and I'd kind of let that lull me a little bit. And it's easy enough to kind of, when you get to a certain state, you can kind of drop all those little mental barriers that you do carry around. And from there, I'd practice moving in and out of my body, basically. It was just a neat thing. It wasn't really work or assigned task. I'd just try to move different places. I'd feel out a point energetically and try to move my energetic body there. And then I would glean what I could from there. Then I'd move back to my physical body and then out again. And again, it was just a lot of practice in, out. Nothing really I had to do, but entertainment's kind of thin on the ground there. So that was what I did. There's also a little bit of balance in there too. If I didn't keep a little bit of my attention on the physical plane, change of direction, kicking a fly, it would knock me off the horse and cause me to fall on the ground. So I had to learn to balance and be somewhat aware in the physical plane while moving these things around on the non-physical plane. Then later in the day, it's evening chores, you'd go in for dinner, and then due to the time of the year, basically I'd go back outside. And I usually stayed out till 8 or 9 because it was still light out, and we'd sometimes have a fire, and I could see what I could see in the flames or watch the bats swooping around as they picked up insects, deer and bear. Occasionally they came out in the fields and watched them and basically glean what I could from the different animals. It used to be fun to watch the bats and try to figure out basically I use it like a divination. So the patterns of how the bats were going and everything, it seemed very random, but it was actually quite interesting to use that. I don't know too many people who do divination with bats, but that was a fun thing I used to do in the summer, and I kind of enjoyed that. Usually 8, 9, I would venture in, get ready for bed, and once I was in bed, I'd practice again, centering, grounding, and I'd do that for a bit. And then generally let it be known that I was all set and see where I got swept off to that particular night. At that point, I was not actively picking where I was going. I would get taken and dropped off for whatever the nightly challenge was. Now, and after a few years after this, I used to get assigned a location pinpoint, and I'd have to find my way there and back. But at that point, I was still really developing a lot of how to handle different situations, and there was still some introduction going on to different places. So a lot of times I would just kind of get picked up and dropped off wherever. Sometimes I'm just trying to think where, sometimes I spent some time in the underworld, sometimes the astral, sometimes it was other places. A few times a week, I would transport things because I was in the process of doing different pick up and drop off of transports and things like that. But it wasn't like an every night deal at that point. It was only like a few times a week. I had other things that I was supposed to be doing. So it was very much a get this object to this place. But there's never actually a name or a designation. It's just like, you're here. This is where it needs to go. And it's kind of like a pinpoint location. And I had to orient and travel to because, again, I'm still learning at this time. So rather than being on the physical plane and giving a point to orient to, I was taken to wherever I needed to be and then given a point to orient to. And then when it was done, I had to find my way back. Once I was done with, whatever I had to do and I had traveled back after that, I might catch some actual sleep. But most of the time, I learned to kind of work while my body slept because the physical body is one thing, but that's not me, for lack of a better term. I just happen to be using it as a home right now. Some nights I didn't work. If there been like a lot of physical labor, or maybe there was nothing that needed doing, or sometimes I, mastered something particularly tricky and got some time off, then I just kind of like do my evening exercises and get some sleep. So that's like a highly generalized view of kind of like what a day was like as a kid. Again, this stuff is completely ingrained in everything I do. It's like asking somebody to think about how they blink. I don't really. I know that I do it. I know that I've been doing it. I don't really think about exactly how I do it. If you were to ask somebody how they blink, they'd say, well, their eyes open and close, but they would not like be able to name off all the little muscles that move every time they blink. Because yes, your eyes open and close, but all those little muscles are what controls that. It's very similar for me trying to figure out how to discern exactly how it worked and then relay that. So this is probably not the best description, but well, that's what I got. One of the other comments, it kind of dovetails in here, so I'm just gonna tack it on here at the end before we close for today. Somebody had mentioned that leaving bodies is terrifying. Leaving your physical body is terrifying. Sometimes it's equated to death, and that kind of intimidates people, I guess, lack of a better term there. So I definitely was taught to look at this in a different angle. I'm trying to think of the most succinct way to put this. Let's just say that a lot of people commonly believe if you die, you move on, you're either reborn or whatever. And if you want to take maybe that, because that seems to be like a common thing that most people would know and understand. You, the essence of you, is able to move on to other things. So if you and the little spark of, we're going to say, self that is you, can move on to other things, then it did not die. Your physical body may die, but you don't necessarily die. You just move on to other things. You've been other places, you'll be other places. Just currently, you happen to be right here on the physical plane. So when I was learning, the way it was conveyed to me is your physical body is just your current housing, and you may buy a nicer house or move to an apartment or something later on. This is just where you are living right now, and you'll move on. So I don't necessarily equate leaving my physical body with dying. If I left it, I just left it. I'll be back later. I guess that's a matter of perspective. So I can see how going out onto the astral or something like that would scare you if you were equating leaving to dying. Leaving doesn't necessarily mean that you die. Unless you turn off all the lights before you leave. Don't do that. But if you're just, stepping out for a little bit, it's like running to the corner store. You might lock the door, but you're not necessarily gonna back the water out of the pipes and prepare to shut the house down. You're just gonna kind of lock up, run to the store, come back. You might not even turn off the TV for this. And that's, I guess, probably a very poor analogy, but it's the only thing that's coming to mind for this. For astral travel, I know there's probably horror stories out there, people who went and then, they died. Yeah, they didn't come back. If you go and come back, you left for a while, you came back. If you go and never come back, that might be more problematic. But stepping out for a few hours our time isn't necessarily an issue, at least in my perspective, because again, this is where I am now. I will move on at some point, and this body won't be in use anymore. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I ended. It just means that this particular body ended. It doesn't even necessarily mean that I'm going, I don't know, to some other realm or plane or whatever. You could end up right back here again. It just means that you're not in this particular body. But it doesn't mean that you died. It doesn't mean that you ended. And not to be rude, but there is a lot of scary, terrifying stuff that you will encounter if you work for any length of time with any form of competence. You're going to encounter things that kind of make you side-eye it really hard. It may alarm you, might scare you. I still find things that kind of terrify me. If just leaving your body for a while is scary, I won't regale you with tales of some of the other stuff that could possibly await you out there. So you really need to adjust your thinking. If stepping out and leaving for a little bit is super super scary. And look, I'm not saying that it isn't. A lot of people have been trained from a very young age, and let's be honest, kids are impressionable, to think that way, that if you leave your body, you've died. Not necessarily true. But again, that's the only thing I can think to say about it being terrifying, that in equating it to death. It's, in my eyes, it is not death. It's run into the corner store. Significantly less scary, not completely undangerous, just significantly less scary. And then you come right back. Just make sure you can get back. That's the important thing, and somebody's going to ask me, so I'm just going to cut that off at the pass. Leave a tag. I think that I read somewhere at one point, somebody was like, oh, they leave a thread behind them so they can come back when they go to the astral. I don't necessarily recommend that, because if somebody clips that thread, you're in trouble. But you should be able to pinpoint your physical body when you're out and about the astral or wherever you're wandering at this point in time. You should be able to pinpoint your physical body and get back to it. Best thing to do with that is practice, maybe not fully going, but partially going, and kind of getting a feel for going and coming back, so that you know you've got to establish your own processes. I can't tell you exactly how to do it. I know how I do it. Don't think that that's going to necessarily work, but basically I pinpoint me. I have, I don't know, we're going to call it a geolocation tag on my physical body. I know where it is. And let's be honest, usually it's here on the farm, and I've got an even bigger tie to that. So I have multiple ways to kind of relocate me if I needed to do that. I guess to sum it up, leaving does not mean that you died. If you don't come back, that might be a problem. If it's scaring you, you got to baby step it. It's not like I just got up one day and started running around on these other planes. Again, it was a long, slow build. It took a lot of work. And I'm sorry to say, that is probably the only way that you will ever get anywhere. Is it is a lot of work. It is a lot of trial and error. It is a lot of, these entities are telling me this stuff, and it makes no sense, because I am currently in a physical body on the physical plane, and the ability to grasp these abstract concepts is extremely muddy here. So there will be failures. You won't get there. You will not get what they're talking about, kind of thing. I imagine other people struggle similarly. Maybe they don't have entities telling them what to do, but for goodness sake, there's a plethora of books out there that give conflicting information and confusing information, and it's essentially the same thing. You have to kind of work it out for yourself, but the literally only way you're going to achieve it is if you are actively working at it all the time. And my personal opinion is it should be every day. You should be working at it every day, even if it is 10 minutes. You should be working at it every day, because again, you're basically teaching yourself. You have to instill these habits. If you want to be able to go and come back, you need to go and come back every single day. Now, you don't have to go far. You don't even have to like fully leave, but you have to practice going and coming back, and eventually you'll get there. Nobody is running ultra marathons after being a couch potato. It doesn't happen. And it is the same way with magical work. It's called magical work for a reason, and we all have magical practices because we are practicing. We have to practice constantly. And honestly, there is no magical practice police that is going to come out and force you to do it. Bottom line, if you have a strong enough will, you'll make yourself do it. If you don't, you won't, and you're also not going to progress anywhere. It is going to come down to just how much control of you do you have, and that will determine how far you go. All right, I will get off my soapbox. It was, as always, very nice talking to everyone. I hope that everybody had a great week. I will try to do some bonus footage. It has been on my to-do list for a little bit now. I thought maybe I would put out a bonus episode here or there. I'm not promising, but I will certainly try to get one together and get it up. So, it may pop up on a Saturday. I'm aiming to put it out on a Saturday, so, if you see something pop up on Saturday, that's what it is. It will be enormously helpful if people quit trying to die around here, because that is seriously interrupting my recording schedule. But anyway, as always, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with others. If you've got any questions or a topic you want to hear more about, feel free to contact me through my website, thesolitarypractice.com, and I'll see you again next week.